I am Allison Corwin, 31 years old woman. I live in Sedona, Arizona, and I work as a behavioral therapist specializing in trauma recovery. 2 years ago, I had a breakdown that led me to step away from my career temporarily, a breakdown my sister would later twist into a weapon against me. What happened next changed everything. The first time I noticed something was off, not just with my body or my thoughts, but something deeper, was on a Tuesday in late March. It had been raining in the desert. The kind of soft, moody drizzle that didn't quite soak the ground but left the whole town smelling like wet sagebrush. I was standing in my kitchen, kettle hissing on the stove, staring out at the copper peaks of Thunder Mountain in the distance, and for a moment, I couldn't move. Not out of fear, out of numbness. My mug slipped from my hand, shattering against the tile floor, but even the sound of ceramic against stone didn't jolt me. I just stood there. I don't know how long. That's when I knew something was wrong. In the weeks that followed, the symptoms grew roots: shortness of breath for no reason, losing hours of the day, waking up at 3 a.m. with my hands gripping the sheets like I was falling. I stopped cooking, stopped returning client calls. I'd open my laptop and just stare. It was as if the inner scaffolding I'd built as a trauma therapist, the strength, the groundedness, had buckled under something I couldn't name. Dr. Lenore, my own therapist, called it secondary PTSD. Said the last client I took on, a 14-year-old who had survived ritual abuse, had been my tipping point. "You've spent your whole life being the strong one," she told me gently during a session. "Even healers need time to recover from what they carry." I cried silently. She prescribed a temporary medical leave, mild SSRIs, and EMDR therapy. And I listened. Because I wasn't afraid of getting help. I'd spent years telling others it was the strongest thing a person could do. But what I didn't know was that accepting help in my world came with consequences. Her name was Tara, my older sister. She showed up at my doorstep 4 days into my leave, suitcase in hand, expression too soft to be real. "I just want to make sure you're okay," she said, arms already reaching to hug me before I even processed her presence. Tara had always been like that, faster than your comfort, louder than your boundaries. We hadn't spoken in over a year before that, not since she'd missed Mom's 60th birthday party and blamed it on a work emergency that turned out to be a weekend spa trip in Malibu. But now she was suddenly the concerned sibling, the caretaker, the voice of reason. I wanted to believe her. God, I did. I was raw, vulnerable. And having someone there making tea, driving me to therapy, ordering groceries felt like a balm. She took care of the things I couldn't face. At first. Until the things I could still do started disappearing too. "I already talked to Dr. Lenore," she said one morning, handing me a new dosage slip for my medication. "She said you should adjust." "You what?" I blinked. She tilted her head. "You seemed confused last night. I was worried." I started keeping a journal the next day, documenting my sleep patterns, my medications, my moods, every conversation that made me question my reality. Because slowly the ground under me was shifting, and I didn't know why. Tara began answering the door for me, making calls to my insurance provider without asking, telling mutual friends I was resting and shouldn't be overwhelmed by too much communication. Then one afternoon, I walked into the living room and found her on my laptop. "I was just organizing your bills," she said quickly, closing tabs. My stomach dropped. That evening, I stood in the hallway and listened as she whispered into the phone. "She's not well, Mom. I don't think she's capable of managing things right now. It's worse than she's letting on." I couldn't hear the reply. But I didn't need to. The words clawed at me like a fever dream. When I confronted her, she didn't blink. "I'm trying to help you," she said calmly. "Don't be dramatic." That phrase, "don't be dramatic." She used it when I was 12 and told Mom she'd stolen my diary. When I was 16 and she took my car without asking. When I was 20 and she told me no one liked coming to our apartment because I acted too intense. Now she was using it to explain why she had access to my medical files. I started locking the bedroom door at night. And then came the summons. A sheriff's deputy at my door, a folded envelope, a seal. Inside a petition, my sister was filing for conservatorship, claiming I was legally unfit to manage my affairs based on observable disassociation, emotional instability, and impaired executive functioning. Her attached exhibits: a picture of my messy kitchen, an old therapy note she shouldn't have had, a screenshot of a grocery list I never finished writing. I stood there, paper in hand, heartbeat in my throat. The room tilted, and then everything inside me narrowed into a single, breathless realization. She had planned this, not out of love, out of strategy. I spent the next 48 hours in a fog of legal terms, calls to patient advocates, frantic Googling. I hadn't been this mentally activated in weeks, but terror has a way of waking you like caffeine never could. She wanted control of my bank accounts, my property, my consulting license. Everything I had built with grit and time and the refusal to give up. Now she wanted to wear it like armor and call it help. I hired Miranda Polk that same week, a fierce, no-nonsense conservatorship defense attorney who specialized in wrongful claims involving mental health weaponization. "You're not the first woman this has happened to," she told me over chamomile tea in her tiny office, "but we're going to make damn sure you're the last in your family." We started building the case. Therapy records properly certified, medication logs, testimony from my support group, character letters from clients and former colleagues. Every hour felt like reclaiming a brick from the foundation she'd tried to steal out from under me. But the most sobering part was realizing how close she'd come. Because if I'd waited one more week, if I hadn't started journaling, if I hadn't felt that whisper inside me saying, "Something's wrong," I might not have been able to stop her. She could have walked into that courtroom and declared me gone. Not physically, but legally. And the worst part, the people who loved me might have believed her. Because control wears many faces. In Tara, she wore mine like a mask. But I was done hiding. And I was ready to prove I was not broken. I was awake. The morning after the court summons arrived, I didn't sleep. I sat cross-legged on the floor, my back against the cold kitchen cabinets, my eyes fixed on the crumpled petition spread across the coffee table. My journal was open beside me, a pen clenched in my fist, but I hadn't written a word. I kept reading the same sentence over and over. Petitioner seeks appointment as temporary conservator due to respondent's inability to make sound decisions. Respondent me. I couldn't believe how sterile it sounded, how easily my identity had been flattened into a legal term. I imagined the judge reading it for the first time, seeing my name reduced to a medical concern, a logistical burden. I pictured my sister's voice narrating those lies with a voice wrapped in faux concern, saying things like she's always been sensitive, or this is for her own good. I wanted to throw up. My phone buzzed on the table, 4 missed calls, 2 voicemails, one from my mother, her voice tight and awkward, the other from a number I didn't recognize. Then on the 5th ring, I saw a name I did recognize, Dr. Lenore. I picked up. "Allison," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." I straightened. "I just received a call from a law firm. They were asking for copies of your session notes." I blinked. "Wait, what?" "They said they were representing your medical interests, that your sister had medical power of attorney." My chest constricted. "No," I whispered, "she doesn't. I never gave her that." "I know," she said, "but the fact that they were confident enough to ask means she's building a narrative. You need to act fast." The call ended, but the air didn't clear. If anything, it thickened. I felt like I was breathing through cots. She was already moving behind the scenes. Tara wasn't just filing a petition. She was laying landmines, quietly shaping the version of me she needed the world to believe. A version fragile enough to sideline, unstable enough to erase. And she was using my vulnerability, the breakdown I had fought through with therapy, grace, and bloody-knuckled determination, as ammunition. I knew I needed help, legal help, but also someone who wouldn't talk down to me. Someone who understood that mental illness doesn't equal incapacity. Miranda Polk's name came from a list Dr. Lenore kept on hand for high-conflict guardianship reversals. That title alone chilled me. There were enough people like me, competent but targeted, to require a category. Miranda's office was in a converted Victorian house downtown. Her handshake was firm, her blazer immaculate, her tone clipped. She read through Tara's petition in silence, her eyes moving with surgical precision. After a long pause, she looked up. "Let me guess," she said, "your sister's the golden child." I blinked. "Yeah. The one who always made everything look perfect." "Yeah. She's weaponizing your vulnerability." Classic play. I exhaled, a jagged, unfamiliar kind of relief, being believed, without a disclaimer. Miranda sat forward. "We're going to need receipts. Every piece of evidence that proves your functionality, bank statements, therapy logs, calendar records, communications. I want documentation of your routines, your medication compliance, even your laundry schedule if you have to." I half laughed, then realized she wasn't joking. So I went home and got to work. I opened my planner and retroactively documented every therapy appointment I'd attended. I printed emails with clients I'd helped even during recovery, when I'd offered referrals and follow-ups. I dug up photos of my apartment from days when it was clean, orderly, dates matching my grocery receipts and utility bills. I compiled a full medication log, including the dates I requested refills. Every small thing I had done to claw my way back into myself was now evidence, not just of survival, but of competence. And through it all, I documented what Tara had done. Her text suggesting she hold onto my bank card. Her email asking for access to my client list, just in case. The conversation I recorded where she said, "You won't remember any of this by next month anyway." Miranda called it building a profile of coercive guardianship. I called it getting my damn life back. 3 days later, we had our first strategy meeting. "She's good," Miranda said, tapping the petition. "She layered her lies with just enough truth to make them look plausible, and she's using your diagnosis like it's a death sentence." I swallowed. "How do we counter that?" "With your recovery," she said, "with your presence, with a voice that doesn't shake." But my voice was shaking. All the time. In private. In the dark. In the quiet moments when I wasn't sure if fighting back would make me look more unstable in the eyes of a judge. That was the cruel irony: the more you defend your sanity, the more hysterical you appear. But Miranda knew that game. And she was about to flip the board. We filed a counter statement within a week, complete with affidavits from Dr. Lenore, character letters, financial statements, and a professional neuropsychological evaluation from a licensed specialist. The diagnosis: temporary PTSD, in remission, fully functional, no evidence of psychosis, memory impairment, or diminished capacity. The report even included a direct line: patient is capable of managing her legal, personal, and professional affairs. I wanted to frame it. The days blurred after that: calls with advisors, strategy sessions, mock testimonies. But the hardest part was hearing the things Tara said about me. In her affidavit, she described me as unpredictable, high-strung, and paranoid. She said I had accused her of manipulating the family, and told the court she feared for my safety and others. She even included a photo of my living room, books on the floor, a cup left on the side table, a blanket half-folded, labeled, "Evidence of deterioration." Miranda shook her head when she read it. "God forbid you live like a human." But I felt exposed, shamed, like my own home had betrayed me. "She's trying to narrate you out of your own story," Miranda said, "so you're going to take it back." We prepped for court like it was war. Because in a way it was. And the battlefield was my mind, not the one Tara claimed was broken. But the one she was afraid was stronger than hers. Because what scared her wasn't that I'd lost control. It was that I'd found it again. And I wasn't giving it back. The courtroom wasn't grand. I don't know what I expected: something dramatic, maybe, vaulted ceilings, polished floors, the kind of setting where fate felt tangible. But the room where my life would be argued was disappointingly plain. Beige walls, flickering fluorescents, creaky pew-style benches. The only thing heavier than the air was the silence. I sat next to Miranda at the respondent's table, knees trembling beneath my skirt, fingers gripped tightly around the pen I'd brought as a kind of emotional anchor. It was my father's pen, metal, cold, familiar. He used to keep it in his shirt pocket. I needed it now like armor. Across the aisle, Tara looked radiant. Perfectly curled hair, a navy sheath dress that probably cost more than my rent. She sat next to her lawyer, someone new, someone expensive, hands folded like a mourning widow. I wondered what she told herself in the mirror that morning. That she was saving me. That I didn't know what I needed. That I was the problem. Case number 4723C Corwin v. Corwin, petition for temporary conservatorship, the clerk read aloud. The judge, Honorable Francine Griggs, was a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s. Her robe swished as she leaned forward and surveyed us both. This case involves serious claims, she said flatly. I expect calm, factual, and respectful proceedings, no theatrics. Tara's attorney began. Your Honor, my client is here today out of love and necessity. Miss Corwin, he gestured at me without looking, has exhibited consistent behavioral instability, including confusion, dissociation, and diminished capacity to manage her financial and personal affairs. My throat tightened. He used words like erratic and disorganized, then held up printed photos of my living room on a bad day, a pile of laundry, a dish in the sink. As if clutter proved incompetence. I wanted to stand, to scream, to say everyone's house looks like that sometimes, but Miranda placed a hand on mine and shook her head, quietly. Wait. Then came the clincher. Ms. Corwin's own therapist described a dissociative episode and recommended a leave of absence, he said. Our concern is not that she's unwilling to recover, but that she's currently unable to assess her own needs. He sat down like he'd just recited Shakespeare. Tara's eyes never left me. Like she was begging me to crack, to show the courtroom what she wanted them to see, a woman on the verge of unraveling. Judge Griggs turned to Miranda. Response. Miranda stood crisp and composed. Your Honor, the petitioner has woven a compelling emotional story, one that conveniently omits critical facts. My client, Ms. Corwin, is a practicing trauma therapist with no history of psychosis, criminal behavior, or harmful conduct. She experienced an episode of occupational burnout. Under medical supervision, she voluntarily sought treatment, took a short leave, and resumed independent living without incident. She handed a file to the clerk. This folder contains licensed psychiatric evaluations, documentation of daily functionality, and character references from clients and colleagues. It also includes logs of unauthorized attempts by the petitioner to access Ms. Corwin's financial and medical records. The judge's eyebrow arched at that. And then it was my turn. Ms. Corwin, she said, voice neutral, you may testify. I stood slowly. My heels clicked against the linoleum floor, each step toward the witness box echoing louder than the last. My palms were slick, my breath shallow. But my voice, it was steady. My name is Allison Corwin, I began. I'm 31 years old. I've worked in trauma recovery for nearly a decade. 2 years ago, I took on a case that pushed me beyond my limits. I had a breakdown. It was scary but not shameful. I got help. I still get help, but that doesn't mean I'm broken. I paused. The courtroom was silent. I turned slightly, looked at the judge, then at Tara. What's happening here today isn't about my health, I continued. It's about power. My sister didn't want to support me. She wanted to control me. When I didn't collapse into her arms, she tried to collapse my credibility. I picked up the evaluation from the stand. This document was written by a board-certified psychiatrist. It says I am of sound mind, that I manage my own affairs, that I am not a danger to myself or anyone else, but more importantly, I live my truth, every day, and no one gets to erase that just because they're uncomfortable with my recovery being inconvenient. My eyes locked on Tara. Her gaze dropped. The judge leaned back in her chair. Thank you, Ms. Corwin. We recessed for lunch. Outside, I finally let my knees buckle. Miranda caught me by the elbow. You were brilliant, she said. I exhaled finally, fully. But it wasn't over. Back in session, Tara took the stand. She cried. She talked about how worried she was, how she lost sleep every night thinking about me wandering the house alone. She even said, voice cracking, all I've ever wanted was for her to be safe. It sounded so real, so human, so convincing. But I noticed something the judge noticed too. Not once did Tara mention me, not what I loved, not my work, not who I was. Only what I made her feel. It wasn't about my health. It was about her image. Her fear of being irrelevant, powerless. Judge Griggs asked one question before ending the hearing. Ms. Corwin, she looked directly at Tara. If your sister is granted full control of her estate without your involvement, what would that mean for you? Tara blinked. I just don't think she's ready. That's not what I asked. Tara faltered. I wouldn't be able to help her or guide her. The judge nodded slowly. I see. And with that, she called the hearing to a close. Final ruling will be delivered in writing, she said. Then she stood, gavel dropped. And it was done. At least the fight in that room. Outside the courthouse, I took off my heels and walked barefoot to my car. The pavement was hot, the wind dry against my cheeks, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The verdict hadn't come in yet, but I already knew something had shifted. This wasn't about waiting anymore. It was about reclaiming. Not just my name. My narrative. The envelope came in the mail. No court summons this time, no fanfare, just a plain manila packet with a thin letter inside, stapled in the upper left corner and folded twice. It didn't even have my name handwritten, just typed, centered, legal. I stared at it for a long time on the kitchen counter. My tea had gone cold beside it. The morning light filtered through the window in patches, landing across the tile floor in golden squares, but I couldn't feel the warmth. Not yet. I don't know what I expected. Maybe for it to feel more climactic, maybe to hear someone say it aloud. But when I finally opened the letter and read the first sentence, I understood the truth about justice. It rarely arrives with thunder. Sometimes it whispers. The court finds insufficient evidence to support the petitioner's claim of conservatorship necessity. All rights and assets remain with the respondent, Allison Corwin. Petition dismissed with prejudice. I read it again. And again. And again. Petition dismissed. With prejudice. That meant Tara couldn't file again, not for this, not under the same claim. She hadn't just lost. She was shut out. My knees gave way and I sat on the kitchen floor, the letter clutched in one hand, the other covering my mouth as the sob cracked out of me. Not relief. Not yet. First grief. Grief for everything she tried to take. Grief for everything I had almost lost, my career, my autonomy, my name. Grief for the girl I was before the world taught me how dangerous it could be to break down in front of the wrong people. Miranda called me later that morning. I saw the filing, she said. You won. I could barely speak. I don't think I won anything, I whispered. I just didn't lose. She was quiet for a beat. You held your line, Allison. That's more than most ever get the chance to do. That afternoon, I went outside barefoot and stood in the sun until my shoulders warmed through. I felt the breeze move through the dry branches of the creosote bushes lining my backyard, and for the first time in months, I didn't flinch at sudden noises. The world stopped feeling like an ambush. Until I checked my phone. One missed call. Voicemail. Tara. I pressed play. Allison, her voice began, clipped and soft at the same time. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry you see it this way. I was only trying to protect you. I know you think I was after something else, but it's more complicated than that. Click. No ownership, no apology. Just smoke and shadow. Just Tara. It was then I understood something I hadn't fully grasped, not in therapy, not in court, not even during the hearing. She was never going to admit it. Because she couldn't. To do so would unravel the version of herself she'd wrapped in righteousness. To her, I would always be the unstable sister, not because I was, but because she needed me to be. If I was well, then she was cruel. And she couldn't live with that. But I could. Because I had lived with it my entire life. I had survived her gaslighting, her silencing, her curated love. Now I could live beyond it. I told Miranda I wanted to pursue more than defense, I wanted to audit. Not just the petition, but Tara's past involvement in family affairs, the estate, the communications with doctors, attorneys, even mom. I needed to see how deep her manipulation had gone. Are you sure? Miranda asked. You've already won, this could get ugly. I paused. I need to know if this was just about me, I said, or if she's done it before to others, to mom, to the trust. So we began pulling records. And with each one the cracks widened. Emails to grandfather Corwin's estate manager requesting emergency reallocations of funds after his stroke. Unauthorized access to our mother's medical documents during her knee surgery recovery. And more than $25,000 in withdrawn trust funds labeled mental health consultation, none of which were ever declared on tax forms. It was like lifting a floorboard and discovering rot. But beneath the disgust, I felt something else. Power. Not vengeful power. Protective power. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was becoming a barrier. For the people who didn't know they were being manipulated. For the woman I used to be, who second-guessed every instinct just because her sister raised an eyebrow. I took the file to the trust's legal advisory committee. They agreed to review her beneficiary status. And 2 weeks later they revoked it. Tara was removed from the primary disbursement list, permanently. It was quiet, surgical, legal. And it gutted her. She emailed me again. This time longer. No subject line. You've ruined me. You were always dramatic. Always needing to make everything about you. You think you're the hero now, but this isn't over. You'll spiral again, you always do. And no one will come next time. I stared at the message, each word colder than the last. And I realized something that stopped me mid-breath. This wasn't rage. It was desperation. Because she was losing her grip, not just on the estate, but on me. The version of me she could twist. The version who would cry and beg and ask her not to be mad. That girl was gone. I deleted the email. Didn't save it, didn't forward it to Miranda. Just let it evaporate into the void where all her threats now belonged. That night I took out my old journal, the one I had started the day after she arrived on my doorstep. I flipped through every page, every messy scribble. And on the last line I wrote, I survived her. The morning I walked into the Corwin estate boardroom as its newest voting trustee, the air smelled different. Lighter, not because anything had changed physically. It was still the same polished oak table, the same wall of abstract oil paintings, the same low hum of central air, but because I had changed. For so long, that room had existed as a place I wasn't welcome. A fortress where voices like mine, shaky, emotional, inconvenient, were softened or shut down entirely. But today, I didn't shrink when I walked through the glass doors. I own my space. Ms. Corwin, the chair of the board, nodded. Welcome. I nodded back, sliding into the seat at the end of the table. No one looked surprised to see me. No one whispered or shifted awkwardly. In fact, a few people smiled, soft, supportive smiles, ones that seemed to say, we're glad it's you. The board meeting was about next year allocations, but I had a proposal ready, a new branch of the estate designated for mental health and ethical power education. Not just therapy funds, but outreach, programming, scholarships for professionals who wanted to study trauma-informed estate law. The chair leaned in as I presented it. This is personal to you, she said quietly after I finished. Yes, I replied, but it's also structural. This family needs new blueprints, not just new decor. The motion passed unanimously. And just like that, the legacy Tara had tried to gatekeep became mine to reimagine. After the meeting, I stepped into the hallway and stood under the skylight dome, eyes closed, letting the warmth of filtered sunlight soak through me. I thought of Grandfather Corwin then. Of the long lectures he used to give us about legacy and image and protecting the family name. I used to hate how cold it sounded. But maybe he wasn't wrong. Maybe he just didn't understand what real protection looked like. It didn't mean silence. It meant boundaries. It meant truth. It meant building something that wouldn't shatter the moment one person decided to use control as a weapon. A week later, I launched the Corwin Access Initiative, the first estate-funded trauma equity network of its kind. It offered free legal clinics for those facing coercive conservatorship attempts, mental health stipends for family caregivers at risk of burnout, a training series for estate attorneys on psychological abuse patterns and ethical power delegation. We even partnered with a trauma institute in Seattle to create a fellowship named after my former therapist, the Lenore Fellowship for Advocacy and Ethics. And for the first time in my life, people started listening, not because I was loud or connected or strategic, but because I was true. And true carries farther than fear ever could. One afternoon, while reviewing initiative applications, I received an unexpected visitor. Miranda. She stepped into my office with her signature coffee thermos and a wry smile. "You made the front page," she said, tossing a folded newspaper on my desk. Corwin Heiress Converts Legacy into Reform, from Patient to Powerhouse. There I was standing outside the courthouse, wind catching the edge of my scarf, smiling mid-sentence at a reporter. I read the article with slow, measured breaths. It talked about what happened, but more importantly, what came after. Not a saga of revenge, but of reinvention. "I should thank you," I said softly to Miranda, folding the paper shut. She shook her head. "You did this." I looked down. "I almost didn't. But you did." That night, I made dinner for the first time in weeks. Real food, garlic sautéed vegetables, rosemary chicken, fresh rice pilaf. I played old jazz on the record player my dad gave me and opened a bottle of red I'd been saving for someday. And then I sat outside on my porch and watched the desert sky shift from orange to blue to black. That's when the memory came. Tara and I sitting on the front steps of our childhood home, summer dusk, ice cream dripping down our wrists. I must have been 9, she was 12. She leaned over and smeared a dot of vanilla across my nose, giggling. "I'll always protect you," she said back then, with a kind of innocence that hadn't yet hardened into control. I let the memory pass, not to forgive her, but to release myself. Because I didn't need her protection. I had my own now. And it was stronger than anything she ever tried to build. Because it was made of truth. And truth doesn't shatter. It was late spring when she came back. Not dramatically, not with a lawyer or a subpoena or an urgent matter, just a knock at the door. I had just returned from a community round table in Phoenix. My heels still clicked across the flagstone entryway when I heard it, 3 soft raps. I opened the door and there she was. Tara. Hair a little shorter, dark roots showing beneath once perfect highlights. She wore jeans and a beige cardigan loose at the sleeves, like she was trying to blend into something more human. Her eyes didn't meet mine right away. They drifted past me as if the doorway itself might protect her from consequence. "Allison," she said, her voice small. I didn't know where else to go. The world didn't tilt, it didn't shatter, it just paused. I leaned against the frame. "I can give you 5 minutes," I said, my tone even. "That's it." She nodded quickly. "I'm not here to fight." I stepped back just enough to let her onto the porch, but not inside. We sat on the bench swing. Silence stretched between us like something ancient and heavy. The air smelled like juniper and distant rain. "I lost my apartment," she said finally. "Work dried up, clients vanished after the case." I nodded slowly. That tends to happen when you try to steal someone's life. She flinched. "I didn't come to rehash it." "Then why are you here?" I thought maybe," she hesitated. "We could talk, clear the air, maybe you'd understand where I was coming from." I turned, really looking at her. "Where you were coming from? Tara, you filed paperwork that said I was legally incapable of managing my own thoughts." "I know. You tried to make me disappear." Her face crumpled. "I was scared. You don't understand what it was like watching you unravel like that." "Unravel?" I snapped. "You mean he'll seek help, take time, that's unraveling to you?" "I didn't know what to do," she whispered. I panicked. "No," I said, my voice cold and certain. You planned, you collected receipts, took photos, called attorneys, you moved in for control, not care. That wasn't panic, that was precision. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, truth always is. She wiped under her eye with a manicured finger. I didn't want to be left out again. You got the trust seat, you got the name, the board, everyone listens to you now. There it was. The root of it. Jealousy so old it had calcified into cruelty. I didn't get anything, Tara, I said quietly. I earned it with scars you gave me. I loved you, she said, almost like a plea. I believe you did, I answered. In your way, but love isn't ownership, and what you did wasn't love. She folded her arms tightly, shrinking in on herself. For a moment, I saw a shadow of the girl she used to be, not innocent, but afraid. I don't know who I am without control, she said softly, repeating the line from her old email. I looked at her, eyes steady. That's not my responsibility to fix. A tear slid down her cheek. I have nowhere else to go. And for a moment, just a moment, I felt something stir in me, pity, grief, an old instinct to rescue. But it passed. I had spent too long rebuilding the house she tried to burn down. And I wasn't handing her the match again. I can give you the name of a therapist, I said, a trauma specialist, someone who understands patterns like yours, but that's it. She looked up confused. You're not going to help me. I am helping you, I said, by not enabling you. Her lips trembled. She stood. This was a mistake. I didn't move, maybe, but it's one I won't make again. She walked down the steps, her figure shrinking with each step down the gravel path. She didn't turn around. And I didn't watch her go. I went inside, closed the door, locked it, not in fear but in finality. Then I walked to the window and opened it wide. The desert air rushed in, dry and wild. And I stood there breathing. Not her air. Mine. For the first time in years, it felt like no one else's hands were wrapped around my lungs. The next morning, I called the therapist I had mentioned. I gave them her name. I don't know if she ever called. But I know I didn't have to wonder anymore. Tara was no longer my responsibility. And healing didn't mean reunion. It meant release. The envelope came with a gold foil crest and a handwritten note tucked inside. Ms. Corwin, we would be honored if you would speak at this year's Women in Law and Ethics Forum. Your voice matters now more than ever. Warmly, Dr. H. Mendelsohn, Stanford Law. I reread it 3 times before setting it down on my desk, heart pounding louder with each pass. Me speaking at Stanford. I had spent the last year behind the scenes, funding initiatives, building support systems, counseling victims through quiet calls and whispered disclosures. But this was public. This was me stepping into the light with my own story, not someone else's version of it. I said yes before fear could talk me out of it. The event was held on a crisp October morning. Stanford's law building looked like a cathedral of intellect, ivy-covered columns, expansive stone courtyards, students and professors buzzing in all directions. I wore black slacks, a dark emerald blouse, and my grandmother's pendant, an old family coin, repurposed into a symbol of luck. The main hall seated hundreds. I stood backstage, palms damp, knees stiff, while a keynote on ethical codes wrapped up. My name echoed through the microphone. And now please welcome Allison Corwin. The applause was polite. Measured. And then I stepped out. The lights were hot on my face. The podium felt too tall, too wide, but I clutched my father's pen in one hand and something about its weight grounded me. I adjusted the mic. My name is Allison Corwin, I began, and I want to talk about what it means to be declared mentally unfit by someone who shares your blood. You could hear the silence settle like dust. I want to talk about how words like unstable and fragile are used not just in courtrooms but in kitchens and bedrooms and quiet phone calls between family members who say they care. I want to talk about how mental health, when twisted, becomes a weapon of control, not a gateway to compassion. I told them about my diagnosis, my healing, the petition, the court case. I didn't list the events in a sterile legal order. I walked them through it, step by step, moment by moment, shame by shame. I watched tears form in the eyes of a professor in the second row. A young woman to my right was gripping her pen like it was her lifeline. And then I spoke the words I hadn't said aloud to a crowd before. My sister filed a petition to strip me of my rights not because I was incapable, but because I was vulnerable. And when vulnerability becomes a threat in a family dynamic, that family is broken. I paused. My healing terrified her, because it meant I no longer needed her to narrate who I was. That's when the applause began, small, scattered, then building, not just polite, not performative. Real. Afterward, people swarmed me. Law student judges, advocates. One woman, no older than 20, grabbed my hand with tear-streaked cheeks. My aunt did the same thing to me, she whispered. I thought no one would ever believe me. I do, I said, squeezing her hand. I believe you. And I meant it. Every word. Later, I sat alone on a bench near the garden behind the lecture hall. The roses were still in bloom, fat and velvet red. A hummingbird hovered near a lavender stalk. I pulled out my phone and opened my notes app. And I typed a message I would never send. Tara. Today I spoke your name on a stage full of strangers. Not in revenge. In reclamation. You don't define me anymore. I do. I hit save. Then delete. And for the first time in my adult life, I realized something deeply, exquisitely simple. Closure doesn't always come in conversation. Sometimes it arrives when no part of you needs to be heard by them anymore. You simply know. You own yourself. And that's enough. That evening, I flew home to Sedona and walked barefoot across my kitchen floor, the tile cool under my skin. I poured a glass of wine and stepped outside into the night air. The moon hung low and golden, casting a quiet glow across the desert rocks. I whispered to the dark just once. I'm free. The box came from a storage unit we never knew existed. It arrived unceremoniously, delivered by a quiet man in a gray delivery van who handed me the clipboard and didn't bother asking questions. It was addressed to me, but listed under my mother's name. Inside, a stack of old files, a few photo albums, and a velvet pouch that smelled like lavender and dust. It had been 6 months since the Stanford speech. My world had slowed, but not in the way it used to. The stillness was a kind one now, less silence, more peace. I had taken the weekend off, finally, with no calls, no initiatives, no appearances. Just myself, a fireplace, and a stack of half-read books. Until the box showed up. At first, I didn't want to open it. My mother had passed 2 years before Tara filed the conservatorship petition. Complications from a minor surgery no one expected to go wrong. Her death was the first crack in the foundation. Tara had handled the funeral, the estate, the will. I was too hollowed out back then to question anything. But now, as I looked at the worn cardboard corners and the faded label with her handwriting, something stirred inside me. A quiet pull. I opened it slowly, layer by layer. The photo albums were familiar. Vacations, birthdays, those grainy disposable camera snapshots of my 5th grade science fair. Then came a folder labeled in my mother's loopy script, "For Allison, only when you're ready." I froze. The folder was thick. Inside were printed emails, bank documents, and a long handwritten letter. My hands shook as I unfolded the pages, the ink faded but legible. My dearest Allison, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And something tells me you're finally starting to ask the questions you were too kind to ask when I was alive. I'm sorry for what I let happen, for the things I saw and didn't say, about Tara, about the way she learned to bend the truth like metal. I blinked back, tears breath catching. You always thought I favored her, that I let her get away with too much. You weren't wrong. But the reason I did it was fear, not love. Tara was commanding. She had a way of taking up space in a room that made everyone else disappear, including me. But you, Allison, you always saw people, you listened, you felt, and that terrified her. I once walked into your room when you were 16, and you were writing letters to women on death row as part of a volunteer project. I asked you why, and you said, because even people who have done wrong deserve someone to remember they're still human. That moment stayed with me forever. I covered my mouth, shoulders shaking. Tara saw your empathy as weakness, but it's always been your strength. And if she's tried to use it against you, I'm sorry. I hope wherever this finds you, you've reclaimed yourself, not with vengeance, but with truth. Enclosed, you'll find a second envelope sealed, notarized, my last amendment to the family trust. I had it added 6 months before I passed. I didn't tell Tara. It names you as primary custodian of the Corwin Health Initiative. Not her, not both of you, just you. Because I finally saw the difference between power and care. And you, my daughter, care deeply, without needing to control anything at all. With all the love I never said out loud. Mom, by the time I finished, the room was spinning. I opened the sealed envelope. It was real, signed, filed, witnessed. She had seen it. All of it. The dynamics, the manipulation, the silence. And she chose me. Not as a prize, but as a trustee. A witness to healing. I sat on the floor for over an hour, just breathing. The wind picked up outside, brushing against the windows like soft fingertips. Later that night, I lit a candle and placed the letter on the mantel, next to a photo of her holding me as a baby. I spoke aloud to the empty room. You did the best you could. And I meant it. Because in her way, she had left a door open. And now it was mine to walk through. Not as a victim. Not as a survivor. But as a leader. The studio lights were warm, too warm, and the set was all soft blue tones and brushed chrome, designed to look calming, like pain could be made palatable if you tinted it right. The makeup artist had just finished patting down my cheeks when the producer poked her head in. We're live in 5. I exhaled slowly. This wasn't my first interview, not since the Stanford speech went viral, but this one was different. National Prime Time, a segment on ethical reform in conservatorships. They wanted my story front and center. I could have said no, I almost did. But something inside me whispered, you're not just telling it for you anymore. The host was kind, practiced, a little too polished. She smiled through the introduction and eased me in with surface-level questions. What inspired your work? What was it like stepping into public advocacy? But then came the deeper one. You mentioned in your speech that the betrayal came from within your family. Would you be willing to share how that shaped your mission? I looked into the camera. And this time I didn't blink. My sister filed to have me declared mentally unfit. Not because I was incapable, but because I was inconvenient. I was healing in ways that challenged how she saw me and how she controlled the story of who I'd always been to her. The studio was quiet. You could feel it, the pause before the shift, before the illusion of a clean narrative gave way to the human one. I learned then, I continued, that sometimes the worst gaslighting comes not from strangers, but from the people who say they love you most. And when you're in recovery, when your mind is fragile but not broken, their version of you can become louder than your own. The host swallowed, and now? Now, I said, I help others make their voice louder than the lies. The segment aired the next night. I turned off my phone before it began. I wasn't interested in metrics, clicks, or applause. I made tea, sat on my porch, watched the stars bleed across the night sky. But the next morning, I had 73 missed messages. In one voicemail. No name. Just breathing. Then a voice I hadn't heard in years. Not Tara. Someone else. Mom wanted me to watch, I did. It was Micah, our cousin. He'd been estranged from the family for a decade after a fight no one ever talked about. Word had it Tara accused him of stealing from the estate. He left, moved to Oregon, changed his number. I never knew what happened. But now his voice was crackling through my phone. I knew back then what she was doing, he said. But no one believed me. It broke me, Al, it really did. I watched your segment and I just wanted to say thank you. You told the truth we weren't allowed to speak. I'm proud of you, and if you ever want to talk, I'm here. I sat there in stunned silence. Micah. He had been the first person to teach me how to build a kite. The one who showed me how to skip rocks. The one who disappeared when I was 17 and whose absence had always felt like a hole no one acknowledged. He had been another casualty of Tara's control. And now, he was calling back. I pressed redial without hesitation. We talked for 2 hours. He filled in the blanks I hadn't known existed, how Tara framed him using forged documents, how our mother doubted him but never confronted her, how he left rather than fight a battle he couldn't win. "You were just a kid," he said, "but I always knew you'd be the one to make it right." I didn't cry, but I felt something heavier than tears, recognition. I wasn't just healing myself. I was tracing a path back through generations of silence, of stories rewritten to serve the ones in control. Later that week, I invited Micah to visit. We sat on the back porch with beers in hand, laughing over stories neither of us had shared in over a decade. And when the sun set, he turned to me. "She'll never apologize, you know." "I know. But maybe," he said, "you don't need her to." I looked out at the desert, where dusk painted the sky in violet and gold. "I used to think I did," I said, "but now I think I just needed to know it wasn't all in my head." He raised his bottle. "To memory," he said. "No," I smiled, "to truth." It was raining the morning of the dedication ceremony. Not hard, just steady, a kind of slow, silvery drizzle that made everything feel softer, like the world was breathing slower for once. We had set up the chairs under a white canopy in front of the new wing of the community center. The sign was covered with a cloth. Volunteers bustled around with umbrellas and program cards, trying to keep things dry. I stood inside the glass lobby, looking out at the misty crowd forming beyond the courtyard. Trustees, donors, community advocates. Micah was already seated near the front, his coat damp, a quiet pride in his posture that warmed me more than the coffee in my hands. This moment had been 2 years in the making. The Corwin Center for Ethical Advocacy, built not just from trust money, but from restitution, reform, and story. I took one last deep breath, smoothed my jacket, and stepped outside. The applause began before I even reached the podium. It wasn't thunderous. It was reverent. I stepped up to the mic, rain spattering softly on the edges of the awning above me. "Thank you all for being here," I began, "especially in this beautiful, stubborn weather." A few soft chuckles. "My name is Allison Corwin, and today is not about a building or even a cause. It's about truth. It's about choosing to rewrite a legacy that once made silence look noble." I let the words settle. This center is dedicated to every person who has been told they were too emotional, too fragile, too dramatic to be trusted with their own narrative. To everyone who's ever had their mental health used as a weapon against their autonomy. To those who were never believed until they had no voice left to use. I paused. And to the ones who survived anyway. Micah wiped his eyes. I stepped down and walked to the covered sign. The fabric dropped with a gentle tug. The Lenore Corwin Center for Ethical Advocacy. Truth without fear, care without control. There was a pause, not for drama, but because even the sky seemed to go still in that moment. Then came the applause, real, raw. And I let it wrap around me like something earned. After the ceremony, I lingered behind. Most guests had left. Only the volunteers remained, folding chairs and drying wires. I walked through the lobby alone. The walls were lined with quotes from survivors, therapists, advocates. But there, near the entrance, was one etched in bronze beneath a black-and-white photograph of my mother. "You don't protect a family name by hiding its truth. You protect it by making room for healing." I ran my fingers along the plaque. And for the first time since all of it began, I felt it in my bones. It's over. Not erased, but resolved. Tara hadn't spoken to me in over a year. Her last email was brief, one sentence. "I hope you're doing better now." I never replied. Because that part of me, the one who needed her to understand, no longer steered the wheel. She didn't need to understand. I did. I understood everything now. Why she feared vulnerability. Why she weaponized concern. Why she could never fully let go of the power she had convinced herself was protection. And most of all, why her love had always come with terms. It had never been about hatred. It had been about fear. But I no longer lived in that fear. I had carved my way through it. Brick by brick. Courtroom by courtroom. Breath by breath. Later that night, I returned home and lit the fireplace. My journal, the one I started after the first petition, now sat full on my bookshelf, spine cracked, pages smudged and worn. I opened a fresh one. First page. And I wrote, I am Allison Corwin. I was never mentally unfit. I was never broken. I was surviving a story that wasn't mine. And now, I'm writing my own. Then I set down the pen and sat with the fire until the last log turned to ember. Outside, the rain had stopped. And the world was quiet. Not with tension. Not with dread. But with peace. Because my story was finally truly mine.